They said I couldn't do it on my own, that I would always need them. Eleanor's voice was calm, almost serene as she spoke the words to herself, standing in the kitchen she had maintained for decades, the sunlight streaming through the half-closed blinds illuminating the countertops where her husband's old coffee maker still sat untouched. She placed her hands on the edge of the worn oak table, feeling the grain beneath her fingers, remembering the meals she had prepared for Jason since he was a boy, the laughter that once filled the house, and the countless late nights she spent helping him with homework or comforting him after a scraped knee. Today, the house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the wall clock, each second marking the absence of voices that had once been constant in her life. Marissa had stopped by earlier, offering help that carried a tone Eleanor recognized too well, the kind that disguised control under the guise of kindness. Eleanor had smiled politely as Marissa insisted she couldn't manage alone, her words smooth and condescending. "Mom, you really should let us handle things. We know what's best for you." The underlying assumption that Eleanor was incapable was almost comical if it weren't so bitterly familiar. Eleanor leaned against the counter, her silver hair catching the light, her mind replaying moments when she had trusted their guidance, moments now laced with subtle manipulation and dismissive remarks that hinted at impatience or frustration when she exercised autonomy. The hardwood floor creaked under her weight as she walked to the living room, scanning the walls lined with photographs, each frame a fragment of her life. Weddings, birthdays, graduations, summer trips along the coasts of Maine and California, picnics in Central Park, Jason's first steps captured in blurry photographs that still made her smile despite the ache in her chest. Each memory carried the warmth of love intertwined with the sting of being overlooked, of being underestimated. She set down a mug of tea she had brewed herself and watched the steam curl lazily into the air, the scent of chamomile soothing yet grounding her in the reality that she had managed before anyone else, that she had always been the silent pillar of her family. The gentle hum of the refrigerator filled the quiet, a steady reminder that life continued even when human connections faltered. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the hallway, imagining the footsteps of her son and daughter-in-law, the hurried chatter of a day moving without her presence. She acknowledged the tension that simmered beneath polite exchanges, the subtle way Marissa adjusted her tone, chose words that framed Eleanor as fragile, dependent, in need of guidance. Yet Eleanor knew better. She had built every corner of this home, every tradition, every Sunday dinner, every birthday cake meticulously measured and baked, every holiday carefully curated with love. Standing there, the sunlight warming her shoulders, she allowed herself the smallest of smiles, not of amusement, but of quiet defiance. She did not need them. She needed herself. Every choice she had made, every plan she still could make, was hers alone. And as the afternoon light shifted, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors, Eleanor felt a subtle but growing sense of liberation, a knowledge that the story of her life was hers to continue, not theirs to dictate, and that growth, patience, and careful observation could be a power far stronger than their misguided assumptions. The house was quiet, filled only with the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the faint rustle of the wind against the window panes. Eleanor moved slowly through the rooms, noticing details she had once taken for granted. The way sunlight fell across the bookshelf, illuminating the spines of novels she had read countless times, the faded marks on the carpet where Jason had tripped as a child, the small dent in the hallway wall from a game gone wrong. Each object carried a memory, a fragment of life carefully built and tended by her hands. She poured herself a cup of coffee, the rich aroma mingling with the scent of polished wood and old photographs. She sat in the armchair by the window, tracing the rim of her mug with a fingertip, reflecting on how the silence of the house had become a mirror of her own thoughts. The absence of her son and daughter-in-law was palpable, yet Eleanor noticed how the stillness allowed her to observe more keenly the subtle behaviors of those who had claimed to look after her. Their absence was not emptiness but revelation. She began to recognize patterns of control hidden within well-meaning words, the way Marissa suggested certain tasks for her own good, while subtly steering decisions to her advantage. Eleanor allowed herself to feel the weight of these realizations, acknowledging the quiet sting of being underestimated, of having wisdom and experience overlooked by those closest to her. She walked to the kitchen window and looked out over the backyard where the roses her late husband had planted bloomed brightly, their petals glowing under the afternoon sun. She thought about all the times she had nurtured both the plants and her family, the attention to small details, the patience required to sustain growth over the years, and how those efforts had often been taken for granted. In that moment, Eleanor made a conscious choice to observe without judgment, to take note of everything as it happened, and to understand the intentions behind every gesture and word. She realized that her power lay not in confrontation but in perception, in the ability to see clearly while others acted under assumption. The afternoon light shifted as shadows lengthened across the wooden floors, and Eleanor found a strange comfort in the solitude. It was a quiet strength, a steady assurance that she did not need to rely on others to define her actions or her worth. She sipped her coffee, felt the warmth spread through her hands, and noted the small details. The slight tilt of the curtains, the angle of sunlight across the rug, the subtle patterns of dust and polish that marked her attention to care. Each observation reinforced her awareness that she was fully capable of guiding her own life, that the house, the memories, and the choices within it were hers to steward. The calm allowed her to think strategically, to plan without haste, and to consider the steps she might take in the coming days to ensure her independence and dignity remained intact. Eleanor leaned back in the chair, feeling the quiet pulse of her own resolve, knowing that the truest growth often came in the spaces left undisturbed by others, and that in embracing this clarity, she was preparing herself for the moments when subtle actions could reshape the balance of influence in her family. Eleanor opened the front door to let in the cool breeze of early evening, the sky painted with the soft orange and pink hues of the setting sun over her quiet suburban street. She stepped onto the porch, feeling the smooth texture of the railing beneath her hands, the same railing she had painted and maintained for years, a symbol of her care and attention. Across the yard, the roses she had tended for decades swayed gently in the wind, each bloom a reminder of patience and growth nurtured over time. Eleanor observed the mailbox at the end of the driveway, noticing how it leaned slightly to one side, a detail she had always planned to fix but had allowed to remain, a marker of time passing. Inside the house, the faint aroma of brewed coffee lingered, mingling with the subtle scent of lemon polish she had used on the countertops earlier in the day. She walked to the kitchen and opened the cabinets, noting the meticulous arrangement of plates and cups, each item in its place, the small order a comforting contrast to the subtle chaos of human interactions. Marissa had called earlier, her tone bright and falsely casual, suggesting Eleanor take a break and let her handle errands, implying that the older woman could not manage alone. Eleanor had smiled quietly, aware that every word carried a layer of control thinly veiled as concern. She poured herself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, her eyes scanning the documents she had set aside, bills, letters, and notes, each representing decades of careful management and attention to detail. She reflected on the conversations she had observed, the subtle ways Marissa redirected discussions, how Jason sometimes deferred to his wife without realizing the undercurrent of influence. Eleanor recognized the patterns, the small gestures that signaled a deeper understanding of how her autonomy had been underestimated. She sipped her water slowly, letting the cool liquid calm her thoughts, and allowed herself to consider each observation carefully. The gentle hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, punctuating the quiet rhythm of the house, giving Eleanor a sense of space to think, to strategize, to understand that the house, the memories, and her choices within it were hers to navigate. She looked toward the hallway leading to the living room and imagined the casual chatter of Jason and Marissa, the hurried movements of people who assumed she could not perceive the subtle manipulations around her. In that quiet contemplation, Eleanor felt a growing sense of clarity, the realization that she could act with precision when the time was right, that the knowledge of small details, of habits and patterns, could be her advantage. She leaned back in her chair, letting the fading sunlight fall across her hands, and acknowledged the steady pulse of awareness building within her. Every movement, every word she had observed, added to a map of understanding, a strategic perspective on her household and family dynamics. Eleanor's thoughts flowed with measured calm, each idea building on the next, forming a quiet but resolute plan of observation and subtle assertion. As the last rays of sun disappeared and the porch light cast a warm glow on the entryway, Eleanor felt the first traces of anticipation, the recognition that patience and careful watching were powerful tools, and that she had the capacity to navigate the delicate balance of respect, autonomy, and quiet authority within her home. Eleanor sat in the living room as the evening shadows stretched across the polished hardwood floors, the soft ticking of the clock marking time with deliberate calm. She allowed herself to recall quietly the countless holidays she had prepared, the dinners she had planned to perfection, and the birthdays she had celebrated with meticulous attention to detail. Each memory was vivid, filled with laughter, the scent of baked pies and roasted meats, the rustle of wrapping paper, and the murmur of family conversations. She traced the edges of the coffee table with her fingers, remembering how Jason had once balanced his school projects there, how Marissa had joined in those moments, often smiling, but also measuring her influence in small gestures Eleanor had only now begun to notice. The late afternoon light shifted across the room, catching the edges of framed photographs, casting patterns on the walls that resembled the paths Eleanor had walked through her own life, careful and steady, always aware of where she had placed each footstep and decision. She poured herself another cup of chamomile tea, the warmth filling her hands and grounding her in the present as her mind cataloged the subtleties of the day. Marissa's casual suggestions, Jason's habitual deferral, the way their words often implied she could not manage without guidance. Eleanor recognized these behaviors for what they were, a gentle but persistent attempt to assert control under the guise of concern. She did not feel anger, only a quiet resolve to observe, understand, and act when appropriate. The living room was tidy, each cushion in place, every lamp polished, every book on the shelf aligned just so, a testament to Eleanor's years of care and precision, and a silent contrast to the small manipulations she had started to see in her family. She glanced out the window at the garden where the late afternoon sun warmed the blooms she had tended for decades, the roses and hydrangeas vibrant against the fading light, a reminder that growth required patience, attention, and endurance. Eleanor took note of the small details, a leaf turned too soon, a branch bent, the way sunlight fell differently across familiar paths, each observation registering in her mind as part of a larger pattern of awareness. She understood that these moments of reflection were as much about her own growth as they were about watching the dynamics around her, that her power was in patience and understanding, in perceiving without being perceived. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant call of a bird outside, the faint echo of wine through the trees all contributed to a sense of clarity, allowing Eleanor to think strategically, plan subtly, and prepare herself for the interactions yet to come. She sipped her tea slowly, the warmth spreading through her, and felt a steady assurance in the knowledge that her decisions, her movements, and her voice, though calm and measured, carried weight far beyond what others assumed. Each small observation, each quiet note of the day, added to a growing map of understanding that Eleanor would navigate with deliberate care, turning insight into the quiet power she had always known she possessed. Eleanor heard the soft chime of the doorbell, a sound that had once brought excitement and anticipation, but now carried a note of curiosity and caution. She rose from the armchair, the cushions still warm from her earlier sitting, and moved toward the entryway, noting the subtle creak of the wooden floor beneath her feet. Outside stood her longtime friend, Sophie, carrying a small notebook and a concerned expression that immediately drew Eleanor's attention. Sophie stepped inside, removing her coat and placing it carefully on the rack, her movements deliberate and respectful of Eleanor's space. They settled at the kitchen table, the afternoon light fading into a soft glow as they spoke quietly, the room filled with the aroma of chamomile tea and the lingering warmth of Eleanor's coffee. Sophie had noticed patterns, subtle behaviors from Jason and Marissa that suggested intentions Eleanor had only begun to suspect, and she shared them with a careful voice, detailing moments when conversations had been steered, suggestions framed as helpful, but carrying hidden directives, and instances where Eleanor's preferences had been overridden without direct confrontation. Eleanor listened intently, her mind cataloging each detail, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup as if to anchor her thoughts in the tangible world while absorbing the intangible insights Sophie provided. She realized the depth of observation required to truly understand the undercurrents in her home, and the significance of subtle actions that spoke volumes more than any loud argument could. The conversation moved fluidly between past events and recent observations, a tapestry of context that Eleanor began to weave into a larger understanding of how her autonomy had been subtly undermined over time. She noted the careful way Sophie described the sequences, the emphasis on patterns rather than isolated incidents, reinforcing Eleanor's growing clarity that this was not accidental but a deliberate shaping of circumstance by those around her. Eleanor took a deep breath, the aroma of tea filling her senses and grounding her, and she recognized the opportunity this insight provided, to act thoughtfully, deliberately, and with measured precision rather than reaction. She felt the first seeds of strategy forming, understanding that the power of observation and patience could be turned into quiet but effective influence. The kitchen, usually a place of routine and familiarity, now became a space of reflection and planning, the walls lined with photographs and mementos that reminded her of the resilience she had cultivated over decades. Eleanor sipped her tea slowly, absorbing the quiet strength in her friend's words, feeling the alignment of awareness and intention settling within her. She recognized that she could maintain dignity and composure while preparing for careful steps to assert her independence and protect the life she had meticulously built. The light continued to fade outside, and the shadows deepened across the polished floors. Yet Eleanor felt a sense of calm determination growing steadily within her, an understanding that patience, observation, and quiet preparation could be far more powerful than any overt confrontation, and that the decisions she made in the coming days would be guided by both wisdom and the clarity of seeing the true patterns within her family's behavior. Eleanor returned to the living room with her tea, the quiet rhythm of the house allowing her mind to unfold the patterns she had begun to map. She noticed the sunlight fading against the living room wall, painting soft golden stripes across the carpet and highlighting the edges of the photographs that lined the shelves. Each photo was a fragment of time she had nurtured, moments that reminded her of patience, care, and attention to detail. She traced the edge of a picture frame with her fingertips, thinking of Jason as a boy, of birthdays, summer trips, and all the small gestures that had created the fabric of her family life. Eleanor reflected on the conversation with Sophie earlier, how each observation had added clarity to behaviors she had long questioned but now understood as subtle manipulations rather than accidents or oversight. The knowledge allowed her to plan deliberately, considering what information she needed, what moves could be made quietly, and how to assert herself without overt confrontation. She walked to the kitchen and opened the top drawer, arranging utensils with precise care, the repetitive action grounding her while her mind wove together insights into strategy. Eleanor considered the ways Marissa had directed decisions under the guise of concern, how Jason had sometimes deferred without questioning, and how the smallest phrases could hint at deeper intent. She wrote brief notes on a pad, capturing patterns, instances, and subtle cues, each entry forming a growing map of understanding. The sun dipped lower, and the room took on a warm, amber glow as shadows stretched across the floors. Yet Eleanor remained attentive, noting each detail, from the angle of the blinds to the faint creak of the floorboards, to the scent of tea mingling with polished wood. She sipped her tea slowly, allowing herself to savor the calm while maintaining an acute awareness of her surroundings, recognizing the advantage that patience and observation could bring. Eleanor thought about the coming days, about how she could approach interactions with measured composure, responding not impulsively, but with deliberate intent that respected her dignity and the legacy she had built. The quiet of the house was her ally, the rhythm of her own actions aligning with the natural ebb of the afternoon light. And in that space, Eleanor felt a subtle but growing sense of power, one born from clarity, knowledge, and the quiet assurance that she could navigate the complexities of her family with precision. Every movement, every observation, every small note taken reinforced a strategy that was not forceful but meticulous, not aggressive but deeply informed. and as she placed her tea back on the table and leaned against the counter, Eleanor understood that the strength she cultivated now would allow her to act with both authority and grace when the moment arrived, transforming insight into quiet but undeniable influence over the household she had always carefully tended. Eleanor walked slowly to the sunroom, the warmth of the late afternoon light filtering through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floors and illuminating the dust motes that danced lazily in the air. She paused to look at the potted plants she had nurtured for years, their leaves glossy and green, each one a testament to her patience and careful attention. The familiar scent of soil and herbs filled the space, grounding her in a world of small, deliberate care that contrasted with the subtle chaos she had observed in the family dynamics. Eleanor moved to the window, resting her hands lightly on the sill, and watched the neighborhood as neighbors walked their dogs and children played at a distance, each sound punctuating the quiet rhythm of her home. She considered the notes she had taken over the past days, the observations she had cataloged with precision, each detail forming a comprehensive understanding of how her son and daughter-in-law interacted, how their intentions often hid beneath casual words and gestures. The quiet allowed Eleanor to think strategically, to imagine conversations and interactions with foresight, considering responses that were calm but assertive, measured yet firm, capable of reinforcing her autonomy without unnecessary confrontation. She reflected on the subtle influence Marissa exercised, the way she presented suggestions as helpful advice while directing outcomes in her favor, and Eleanor realized that patience and timing would be her greatest allies. She sipped a glass of water, feeling the cool liquid steady her mind, and allowed herself to plan in increments, considering small actions she could take to assert boundaries and protect the home she had built with decades of care. The afternoon sun shifted slowly, casting a golden hue across the room, and Eleanor traced the edges of the furniture, noting small imperfections and details that reminded her of the life she had meticulously maintained. Each observation strengthened her resolve, and she understood that the quiet accumulation of knowledge, attention to detail, and deliberate patience could wield a power far greater than overt confrontation. She walked to the small table by the window and rearranged a few objects, a subtle act that reminded her of the control she retained over her surroundings, the space she had nurtured and preserved. Eleanor felt the rhythm of her breathing synchronize with the stillness of the house, the steady pulse of awareness providing clarity and confidence. She allowed herself to envision the coming days with a sense of calm strategy, knowing that her observations, careful planning, and quiet execution could influence outcomes without raising alarms, that the patience and insight she cultivated would guide her in maintaining dignity, asserting independence, and subtly shifting the balance of authority in her family while keeping her composure intact. As shadows deepened and the sun dipped below the horizon, Eleanor felt a quiet satisfaction in the knowledge that she was fully aware, fully prepared, and fully capable of navigating the intricacies of her home with grace, intelligence, and steady confidence. Eleanor moved through the quiet house as twilight settled in, the deepening blue of the sky visible through the tall windows in the living room. She paused by the bookshelves, her fingers brushing the spines of novels and albums she had collected over decades, each one a fragment of a life meticulously tended. The faint hum of the heating system was the only sound besides the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, marking the passage of time with steady precision. She carried a small notebook with her, filled with observations, notes about conversations, gestures, and subtleties she had cataloged over the past weeks, each entry a piece of the larger understanding she was building about her family's behaviors and intentions. Eleanor set the notebook on the coffee table and sat in the armchair, the cushions familiar and comforting under her weight, as she reflected on patterns she had identified. The gentle redirections, the careful phrasing, the unspoken assumptions that had guided decisions without her input. She recognized the intent behind them, the quiet influence exerted under the guise of care, and she appreciated the clarity that patience and observation had provided. Eleanor traced the edge of a photograph on the side table, her mind revisiting moments with Jason and Marissa, times when she had smiled politely, while noting the subtle shifts in tone, the small adjustments in behavior that indicated underlying motives. The room. was bathed in a soft amber glow from the lamps, the warm light accentuating the polished floors and the familiar contours of the furniture she had selected and arranged over the years. Eleanor sipped a cup of chamomile tea, feeling the warmth settle into her hands and calm her mind, reinforcing the sense of deliberate focus she had cultivated. She envisioned the coming days, mapping interactions and considering responses that would assert her independence and maintain her dignity without overt confrontation. Each thought was measured, each plan constructed carefully, as she understood the power inherent in subtle, informed action. Eleanor stood and walked slowly to the window overlooking the garden, observing the roses and hydrangeas bathed in the fading light, their colors vibrant despite the encroaching darkness, a reminder of growth nurtured over time and the patience required to sustain it. She allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection, acknowledging the strength she had developed through years of care, observation, and attentive thought, realizing that insight and strategic patience were far more potent than immediate reaction. The shadows deepened across the floors and walls, yet Eleanor felt a calm determination, a steady awareness of her environment and the subtle forces at play. She noted small details, the tilt of a curtain, the angle of sunlight on a table, the pattern of light on the walls, and understood how these markers of familiarity and control could guide her presence and actions. Eleanor recognized the quiet confidence that came from being fully aware, fully prepared, and fully capable of navigating the complexities of her home and family, and she allowed herself the knowledge that in this calm, observant state, she could shape outcomes, assert her autonomy, and preserve the life she had carefully built with intelligence, composure, and subtle authority. Eleanor stood in the center of her living room as the evening deepened, the soft glow of the lamps casting gentle reflections on the polished hardwood floors and the walls adorned with decades of photographs capturing laughter, milestones, and moments of quiet joy. She allowed herself to take a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the calm steady her mind as she surveyed the space she had cultivated with care and attention over the years. Each object, from the carefully arranged bookshelves to the antique clock ticking softly on the mantel, spoke of order, patience, and foresight, qualities she had applied to every aspect of her life. Eleanor's gaze lingered on the collection of framed family portraits, observing subtle shifts in expressions, postures, and interactions captured in those frozen moments, recognizing the patterns she had noted and cataloged over the past weeks. The gentle hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of wind rustling through the trees outside created a quiet rhythm that allowed her to reflect on her own growth, the decisions she had made, and the autonomy she had steadily reclaimed. She moved toward the window overlooking the garden, the fading light highlighting the roses and hydrangeas she had nurtured for decades, their vibrant colors a living testament to patient care and sustained attention. Eleanor considered the observations she had compiled in her notebook, each note representing an insight into subtle influences, unspoken intentions, and the nuances of family dynamics that had previously gone unnoticed or underestimated. She felt a quiet satisfaction in the realization that her careful attention and deliberate patience had provided her with the clarity and understanding needed to act thoughtfully, to respond to situations with measured precision, and to maintain dignity and authority in her own home. Eleanor poured herself a cup of chamomile tea and let the warmth spread through her hands, grounding her in the present moment as she considered the steps she might take to reinforce boundaries and assert her independence. The quiet of the house enveloped her, offering space for contemplation and strategy, the shadows lengthening across the floor creating a tapestry of light and dark that mirrored the subtlety and complexity of the relationships she navigated. She traced the edge of the table with her fingertips, thinking of the countless ways she had nurtured her family, built traditions, and managed daily life, and she recognized that this foundation of care and attentiveness was now a source of strength and insight. Eleanor allowed herself to feel the calm confidence that came from being fully aware of her environment, fully attuned to the patterns and behaviors of those around her, and fully capable of translating knowledge into quiet, effective action. The house, the memories, and the careful cultivation of her surroundings gave her a sense of power that was steady, composed, and deeply rooted in experience. As night settled and the last light of the day faded into the soft darkness of early evening, Eleanor felt a profound sense of autonomy and clarity, understanding that the path she had walked, the observations she had made, and the patience she had practiced all converged to provide her with the tools to navigate her family life with intelligence, grace, and unwavering self-assurance.